Welcome to another Friends in Wonder podcast, a place where we invite you to wonder with us about meaningful topics without judgment or limits. Brought to you by two lifelong friends looking for insights through a lens of how can this help? I'm Joe Luther.
And I'm Vince Kern.
And we're your hosts. Now let's wander and wonder together.
Joe and I are in the different studios today up here in Big Bay, Michigan on Lake Superior. And how are you doing today, Joe?
I'm doing great. How can I not be doing good in the most beautiful lake on the planet and with my very good friend Vince. And I'm really excited about the topic of today's episode because it also involves interviewing another good friend of ours, Paul Tetreault. And today's topic is something that's near and dear to my heart. It's about business coaching. And the reason I am excited about it is because in my business career, I've been able to utilize these kind of services.
And how did that go for you in general?
Well, I mean, I think what's interesting, and it's just like really any kind of personal growth, businesses are the same as, human beings and relationships. And, a lot of times people think that the success of a business is how much money you're making, or how successful you are at making money. But what we found in one of our businesses, in fact, the one that was the most successful at making money, was that it was the one in most need of business consulting. And there's various kinds of business consulting. There's, as I'm sure our guest will talk about, but what we needed at the time was we had like 4 entrepreneurial minded businessmen come together and create a business. And while the objective was to make money, what we found as we got to that objective is that we also had a lot of, like personal infighting. We had grown our team to 30, 40 employees. And some employees knew that if they wanted to behave a certain way, that they could ask one owner. And if they wanted to avoid certain consequences or accountability, they could ask another owner. And so we ultimately had to learn how to navigate that. And so we brought in a business consultant at the time. And what was great about it, though, was that not only did it help our business, it just helped us all grow personally.
Yeah, it's so interesting that when we think of work, we don't always think of the personal happiness and value that work brings. We're not programmed. We're programmed to think about goals and tasks and things. And it sounds like in your experience, goals were a little off track because the team wasn't pulling together and you had to bring somebody in and address that. Is that what?
Well, I think the word goals is probably one of the loaded topics of what today's discussion is going to be, right? Because in fact, I think Western civilization defines success as how much money you make. And, certainly in a business, that's an important metric. But, there's a lot of unhappy people making money. And are they unhappy because they've got a very dictatorial business management style, or are they unhappy because it's disorganized? There's a lot of reasons you could be unhappy, but if you just use money as the measurement, it doesn't often prompt your, financially healthy business to take a good look at itself. And that's what, we had to do is sometimes an owner might say, well, why do we need to fix this? We're making plenty of money. Well, we could probably be doing better. We could be happier. The business team could be doing better, and we aren't really realizing our full potential.
Yeah. It's you talk about people being happy, and I think most people are happy when they are doing their personal best. And it's hard to do that. It's hard to stay focused on doing your personal best. I mean, you come up to a place, we're sitting here looking at a sailboat going out on Lake Superior, and it's easy to see that the earth, when it's being its best, is by allowing us to be in places like this. And so a person to do their best, they have to be in a good environment as well. And it's so important that the people enjoy what they do. And I'm sure our guest Paul will illuminate us. He's has worn many hats in his career, and I think he's had a lot of success in bringing his best to help other people be their best. And that's one of the reasons I'm excited to talk to him more today, to find out how he does that, because it's not an easy task.
No, because I think part of the problem is, it's kind of like again, going back to the personal growth problem. And I think they even talk about it in, 12-step recoveries. It's the first thing is admitting that you need help and I think a lot of times businesses, that's probably the first challenge. And I'm excited to talk to him about that. But, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves at this point because, rather than us go back and forth about it, why don't we
talk to Paul?
I'm overjoyed to be able to briefly introduce Paul Tetreault, somebody who both Vince and I have known our whole life and has had a wonderful and very successful business career. He is by education, he is an accountant as well as an attorney. And by experience, he is a successful business person who has sold a business and built a couple of businesses and has in his, the last 5 or 10 years has expanded his resume to being a strategic business coach for a company that he started called BoxCar Advisory.
Welcome, Paul. It's an honor to have you here today.
Well, good. Good to be here. Thank you, Vince, and thank you, Joe. It's great to be here in your Big Bay studio.
I hope our green room was sufficient for your contractual requirements.
I believe, given the geographical locale, it was more than adequate.
Good.
We were, in our introduction, we were talking a little bit about, my experience with the need for business coaching. And, I briefly discussed how we were an entrepreneurial organization that was making progress financially, but was having difficulty in terms of, realizing our true potential, partly because we had some dysfunction going on with employees, but we knew kind of deep in our hearts that we weren't going to take what they call the next step until we got a little bit more organized. Vince worked in some large corporations, working for the media publishing and news agencies. I think you had some experience with business coaching as well, right?
Yeah, well, I had a lot of experience with being the person that was responsible for achieving the, in air quotes, goals, and then dealing with the leadership not driving those goals home. And so a lot of the people who, were doing the goals were somewhat frustrated because they felt like they were doing the work, but without any support from top leadership. So my perspective has always been sort of at the mid-level guy helping to bring
That's
the goals together.
So, yeah, I guess with that kind of begs a question then, Paul. How, from our standpoint, you have an entrepreneur who is interested in growing his business. In other circumstances, you might have, a team that's being managed that wants a little bit more structure. How do you basically come into your work with a business?
Well, the way I try to present it to the client is when we first begin discussion is, ask in what way would they like to see their business run better? What would they like to see differently? And are they getting everything that they want from their livelihood? And their livelihood is composed of, the economic well-being of themselves as well as the company, but also what they get spiritually from this thing that we call work. But typically what business owners experience, or business leaders, because I'm frequently called by them as well, is they're suffering from definitely people issues. Business has a lot of people in it, so there's always people issues. Could be issues on anemic or inconsistent profitability or organizational structure. Accountability and discipline are big things. So these are usually the symptoms that draw people to want to work with a business coach or me. And so the way my approach is that I work with leadership teams only, pretty much 95% of the time. And I have them come into my session room, and it's like coming to the Mayo Clinic for an annual checkup. And we check in on all these different variables of their business to see how they think they're doing and where they think their gaps are and where they need to build strengths. And from that, this visit to the Mayo Clinic or BoxCar Advisory, we come up with, very specific task lists of what we need to focus on to be a better team.
Well, I guess that kind of dovetails into what we were talking about at the beginning, and that is, how does a business know when it needs help?
I think people come to a business coach for a multitude of reasons, and sometimes it's for glaring reasons, meaning they're not profitable enough, because that's what is the ultimate scoreboard. But it's also that they don't feel that the team works well together, the team doesn't communicate. They know there are many unsaid things in every meetings, or their meetings themselves aren't very productive. They're just good dialogue. Could be they're not consistently achieving their goals. These are all things that plague companies, because you're dealing with the ecosystem of people, and it's always a challenge to build teams.
And as we know in life in general, and I'm sure it's extremely true in business, where people are concerned about their livelihood. There's always a resistance to change, right? And people are afraid of they'd rather be stay with the devil they know than expand into the unknown. So I imagine some of your first meetings with businesses have a lot of different flavors.
Yeah, there's always an element of apprehension with some or all of the team, because they are starting something that is unknown with a lot of uncertainty. Very few people have gone through this type of exercise, although that's growing because business coaching has. But yeah, we're humans, so we don't like change. We like the safety in what we know, even if it's not working for us. So,
right, even if you're unhappy, you're still afraid of change.
You talked about the business of business coaching, and I'd love to hear your sort of thoughts on the landscape of that, how it's evolved, maybe what it is now, and what distinguishes you maybe from other business coaches in terms of what you bring or what you see in the business itself.
Well, there are a wide variety of business coaching approaches and curriculums that you can follow. I think they all follow the same fundamental approach, meaning that you got to get some basic business instincts and tools down pat. I think where they differ is in their means of implementation, and that's where the nuances of hiring a business coach is, critical. You got to make sure it's somebody that you can connect with, that it's somebody that has the requisite business depth to be able to dig in with your team on key issues and facilitate the dialogue to get to the real answer and not just the surface.
That's got to be hard. I mean, there's got to be a lot of, we've been talking about the opposition to change, but does that sometimes involve the very top level people as well?
Well, I work with what is construed as a leadership team. So it's typically between 4 and maybe 8 people at most. And they are the decision makers and the ones, chartered with the governance of the company. So that's, who I work with. And my job is to get them, to not give them the answer. My job is to facilitate the dialogue, to get them to the best answer for the company, and to get them out of their comfort zones and to dig in and identify what the real problem is, because frequently the real problem is in that room.
Right. And so that puts you in an awkward position sometimes, I would imagine, that you've got to be pretty frank and direct with the people who are really responsible for you being, for you getting a paycheck.
Well, it can be a little bit awkward, but in my position, it's not, because I'm not emotionally invested with with the company. I am with the people, but one of the things that I'm trying to teach people is that the issues that affect their business need to be viewed academically and not dragging in the human emotions of fear and ego and self-preservation, which makes the difficult conversations awkward. And I teach teams to get away from that and to focus on it as an academic exercise. We'll deal with the people issue once we solve the root issue.
Yeah, so I think probably one of the really interesting challenges that you face is that you have a management team that's hired you, but may be the source of the problem. And so you've got to be brutally honest sometimes with how they need to change their behavior. How do you navigate that?
Well, it's interesting because people go through the extreme discomfort of hearing what the problem is, and frequently the problem is them or a person in the room or multiple people in the room. But what I'm trying to teach them is that there are a lot of unsaid things in the room that is holding the entire team and company back, as well as haunting every one of them on their way home every night, and to just get it out there. And so one of the key things I think I teach people is how to communicate and to say what's on their mind, but to do so constructively for the benefit of the business. And by doing so, what is once just uncomfortable and very awkward becomes, we're just trying to make the business better.
Yeah, well, that's interesting.
Sounds like it makes the people better too, which is that whole circular thing of business and personal. There's
Taking a hard look at yourself.
Taking a hard look at yourself and realizing that, you spend a lot of time at work. So why not be quote unquote happy, whatever that is? How do different people find different things of value in an organization when you're working with them? The value, one thing over another from a leadership team?
Well, yeah, it's that metric of money versus happiness.
Well, sure. I mean, if you approach your livelihood as it's just work and you just need to grind it out, you're probably not going to be looking for a business coach. You're probably not going to enjoy working with a business coach because you just want to punch your time clock. What we're trying to do is make your livelihood more of a rewarding experience, because we do spend 30 to 40% of our life at work. And this should be something that gives you purpose and a sense of fulfillment that you've contributed and you're part of a winning team and a team that is accustomed to winning. So people look for different things. I've summarized it very simply. I think people want the exact same two things. We just define it differently. And what people want is they want prosperity. And they want a great place to work without any drama or BS. They want to be able to come in and do their work and have an opportunity to be the best at whatever it is that they do, no matter what it is. And that's what people want.
So how does the process work for you then? Let's say that you are called into a typical client opportunity. How does it work? I imagine there's different layers of you don't just jump right in and start fixing things. You've got to determine what the issues are first. And do you meet with a team, or how does it work?
And so, as I indicated, it's when they first come to my session room, it's like coming to the Mayo Clinic. And what we're trying to do is an annual physical. See how healthy you are. So I follow a curriculum of about maybe 15 different topics that we have a discussion about where they think they're at and how aligned is the entire team that's in my room with what they all think it all means. And one of the key things that we start out with in the first 2 or 3 hours of the first day is talking about their culture and their core values. And I always ask, well, okay, so what are your core values? And it's very rare for anybody in the room to be able to recite all of them, off the cuff. So right there, we have an issue that they think their core values are important, and yet none of the leaders know them. So we know we need to focus more on that. But there's about 15 different things, and every client's going to be different. But typically what happens is we spend 3 full days with just the leadership team, 3 full days, about maybe 3 to 4 weeks apart. checking in on all these topics. And some teams it's 2 full days, some teams it's 3. And from that, we have a very good idea of what we need to be focusing on to strengthen them as a team. But also through that process, we've identified the goals that they need to be focused on, both short term and long term.
Interesting. Do you find that people are hesitant at first to want to be honest and open, or is it just a varied mixed bag of?
It's definitely a mixed bag, but it's more one of degree. I don't think I've ever encountered a team that is very open and honest with one another. We're human beings, and we're not wired to be necessarily frank and very direct with our teammates. We don't want to say things that could be construed as harmful, or that might hurt someone's feelings, or talk about their performance, or maybe challenge them on a plan that they have presented. Humans don't want to do those things.
Well, yeah, we don't like confrontation, do we?
No, we don't. And so through the coaching experience, the goal is to get them to realize that confrontation, or the word that Patrick Lencioni uses is conflict. I like saying dissent. We like to have dissent in our dialogues. It stress tests our decision. And all we're doing is trying to find the best answer for the company. And so this idea of confrontation is really about getting to the best answer. And we should view that in a healthy construct.
Do you see that as like a milestone in the change of a team's progress? In other words, once they understand what you just said, is that when the real fire kicks in?
Yeah, it definitely does. I've had probably half a dozen clients tell me that and somewhere between the 6 and 9 month mark of our work together, they might say something along the lines of, well, we aren't yet necessarily running a lot better as a business, but man, are we communicating better? And what they get from that is a lot less stress, because they don't go home thinking, oh, I should have said this, or I wish, Bob or Nancy wasn't always, challenging my plans, and they feel defensive. All that goes away. And they all realize that they're on the same team pursuing the same thing.
So you've helped make their work life better, which helps make their whole life better. And how do you feel when that happens? I mean, that's kind of why you're in this business, I know, because, we've talked about it before, but you've had a long career arc and you're now helping people be their best. And I'm sure that's got to be a gratifying experience for you.
Yeah, tremendously so. I mean, my personality is one that needs a purpose, and so I tend to be a giver. And to me, it's just very, very rewarding when a team just says, we're just so glad to be engaged with you. We're, finally starting to function as a team. We're achieving our goals. I've talked to, leaders who have called me, they're on a drive home or something. They want to, use me as a sounding board for a particular topic to get to a better answer of how they're trying to solve something. And before they hang up, they just say, this has been awesome. And it's just great to be working with you. And for me, that's extremely rewarding.
The phrase that comes to my mind when I hear you talk is empowering. That you're, really giving the leaders and the business and even the employees an opportunity to be self-empowered.
Well, yeah, myself, I'm very big on empowerment. I was in my business career. I was very good at holding people accountable but also giving them the clarity of expectations, and then giving them the framework to be able to achieve that. And that framework is about empowerment. And I think most people want to work hard and they want to do well, but they want to be able to do it.
Yeah.
And that's where the empowerment part
So
is.
then what is
critical.
a success story? I'm sure you probably can't, or you might be uncomfortable about talking specifics with names or companies or anything like that. But how about give us, the listener an idea of what does a success story feel like to you for a typical client?
Well, I don't think there's any such thing as a typical client. And the portfolio of clients I have is indicative of that because it ranges from a charity that's about $1 million a year to a $4.5 billion private equity group. So there's no typical client. But I would say that most companies that begin work with me are companies that are doing okay. Their profit is okay. It's usually somewhere right around 8 to 10%. They're growing a little bit, but they just know they can be a lot better.
Something stale.
Yeah, it's just something's funky, and they're just not zeroing in on what the issue is, and they just need a different voice in the room. And so when they start to be engaged with me, we literally just start sharpening their saw. And saying, okay, what do we need to work on? And one by one, we knock down where their weaknesses are and build their strengths up. And after about a year, we do a look back. And instead of just looking for issues, we're saying, hey, what went well? What did we do really well this year? We start listing that out. And all of a sudden, the team, they start to say, wow, we've got a little swagger here. We actually know what we're doing. And they feel it. They feel confident as a team now instead of finger pointing. As a result, the flywheel is beginning.
Change is inevitable, and so people are always going to be going through change. I'm curious about, do you have any perspectives on how the last few years of COVID has changed people, their business, your business in general? I mean, there's a lot of talk about, work, remote relationships and team relationships, but what's your insight into that sort of broad topic?
So COVID affected everybody, and we're still seeing the effects of that. As a matter of fact, I had a conversation with a client yesterday who just said that the kids at her children's school are just suffering so much from COVID. So that's, I think, the real sad part of it. From business, though, you have to be a survivor. You have to be adaptable. And so I don't think any business plan anticipated a pandemic, at least none to my knowledge. And so there's an awful lot of pivoting that went on, and some of it good and some of it not so good. But I think business adapted very well. I mean, just look at what restaurants did. I mean, a lot of restaurants now probably prefer to just do carryouts. They've got that model down.
Right. Less service seems to be the norm now.
Yeah. DoorDash, is very popular. Uber Eats. As a matter of fact, I just picked up, a week or so ago for my family, something from one of the great Asian restaurants in our community. And the bag we picked up was a tamper-proof bag. Which I'd never seen before. So they're
embracing
They put the food in this bag and it gets heat sealed. And so it can't be opened like by a DoorDash driver. So it gives, the consumer a little greater sense of security, but somebody identified there is an opportunity there. So that I think is, one of the good things that came out of it. But I think the other thing that it will come out of the pandemic, it's going to take a while to shake out, probably years. But this idea of working from home taught people that work means different things now. And it doesn't mean that you go into the office every day or the plant. It might mean that, work is going to be more fluid. And even some of the more draconian leaders I worked with, where work from home was no friggin' way, are now saying, it's not so bad.
Yeah. So how would you, just to continue on Vince's question, how do you manage during a pandemic bringing a team together? Do you have literally tools that you use for, is it just Zoom or is there some other way? How do you, now you've got people remote and you're trying to coach them. Does that cause concerns about people being frank? In other words, do you have to have everybody in a room or can you do it virtually?
Well, I do virtual sessions. I did quite a bit early on in the pandemic. And like everyone else, I had to learn how to have an 8-hour virtual session. And so my session room is probably have about $30,000 of equipment in it to make sure that's a great experience. I have multiple cameras, sound system.
Why multiple cameras? Because the reason I'm asking is I envision that every management team's got a bunch of different personalities. And some people like to hide. Some people like to take the spotlight. So do you navigate that to make sure that the people who are comfortable hiding come out of their shell?
Well, that's the job of a facilitator to do that, to make sure that everyone is engaged into the process. I mean, in the work I do, if you're not engaged in the process, I will challenge why you are there. Because if you're not engaged, you can't contribute. But this idea of virtual can mean different things, and typically my preference is that we are either all virtual or we are all present. Now, occasionally somebody is out of state and they can't make it in, so one or two people on a team of 6 to 8 might be virtual, in which case they'd be on my big screen TV. And that's where I would have multiple cameras in my session room, one of which is, activated by voice. So the camera will pivot to whoever is speaking. But you come up with different rules. As an example, and this is just what we've learned being, more in a virtual world is, for teams, if you don't have a setup like mine, which very few companies do, that if there's a group of more than 2 people that are engaging on camera with another group, everybody should be on their own laptop. That makes it a more virtual experience for everybody. So even though you have 4 people in one conference room, and 4 people maybe virtually, the 4 people that are in the conference room have their own laptop and camera, and that way everyone looks uniform on the screen, which makes it a lot easier for people to feel more engaged. So there are these things that we're learning as a world on how to make the virtual experience much, much more effective. Me, one of the cameras I have is for my whiteboard. So I can go to my whiteboard and write on it, and people can see exactly what I'm writing. And I can send them a screenshot of it so that they have it for their files. So virtual, when I first did it, I was terrified and I begrudgingly did it. But once I got the right tools in place, I'm very adept at it. And in some cases, I would rather do it virtually.
Interesting.
So, and you have a statewide business too. You're not just dealing with clients in one location. So you're dealing with people all over the state, right? And I imagine that plays into that aspect as well.
Yeah, it does. I have one client that's 300 miles away, and they are very thoughtful. And sometimes they will say there's no need to drive 300 miles to visit us. We can do this particular session virtually. And so I'm grateful for that kind of relationship. But I'm indifferent now, virtual or otherwise. As a matter of fact, I'm contemplating building a library of virtual sessions that other clients can access, learning a particular tool.
Different topics, different tools, how to address X by doing this kind of thing.
I don't, as a facilitator, the only time I don't like to do virtual is when I first meet with the team. Because I don't know the people, and you need to
feel the tension.
You need to learn, feel the tension, but learn their body language a little bit and get them so that you can identify when somebody is maybe struggling with a concept, which is hard to do when you only have a headshot. But also, when they're saying yes, but they really mean no. Those are things that a facilitator and a coach has to be, identifying and addressing in some way.
So, Paul, you've had a long business career. You're a lawyer. You've had a business degree. You've worked in several different places, and I'm sure you found gratification in what you did along the way. How is this experience, compared to other things that you've done in your career now that you're helping others be their best?
I don't. In some ways, I don't think it differs that much. When people say, "How long have you been a business coach?" I say I've been one for over 30 years because when I built my first business, that's what I was. Most leaders are business coaches, and nowadays you need to be a better coach than you do a manager because that's what particularly the younger set are expecting. So if I look back at my career, I was business coach, throughout as I built my own business, and then after I sold it, when I was part of corporate America, and that was absolutely a great experience. As a business model, this is all I do, and I can nimbly move from one client to the next, either in half-day increments or day by day, and I'm very comfortable doing that.
Tell me, what's your joy? Like what makes you excited to get up in the morning, as part of this new experience?
What gets me excited is being able to work with a group of people who are capable, they're competent at what they're doing, but for some reason they're not in harmony. They haven't figured out how to work with a synchronization that delivers results for them, the results that they're looking for, and they just need somebody to help them with that process. And so that kind of work where I have a very committed group of people that say, we know we can be better and we want to be better, so help us get there. And when I can participate in that process, it's particularly rewarding. I indicated earlier, where a business leader called me on her way home and we walked through a very complex employee issue that she had. And at the end, she just said, God, this has just been awesome. I've lost so much sleep in the last 3 days because of this. And I just feel better knowing that I've done a sanity check on this. And I feel that what I need to do next, I can do so with greater conviction. And that makes me feel good that I helped someone do that. I had another client where I was working with he and his sales team. So I wasn't working with a leadership team on this. And really what they needed was just a lot more clarity, not only on the goals that they have, but what were the metrics that they were going to be measured against, and to help facilitate that dialogue. And by the end of the day, I had a group of 7 people that had been in this destructive tension for years. And at the end of the day, they suddenly have greater clarity on, okay, now we have a better idea of what we need to do, how we're going to go about doing it, and how we're going to define whether we're winning. And sometimes it seems like that's all sounds so simple, and yet when you're dealing with teams of people, it's very complicated.
Yeah, people are afraid to change or to say what's really on their mind.
Once that change has taken place, does it always stay in place?
No, it doesn't. Some teams are more skilled at that than others. Some of the changes don't become internalized, and that's what I try to get them to view it as. This is a better way to lead your work life. So you have to constantly embrace it, because in today's world, change is never ending. It's always coming at you. But you need to embrace the changes that we have proven in our work together, that this is a benefit to the company. And we got to hold each other accountable to doing the things that are best for the company.
You use the analogy, it's like going to the Mayo Clinic and getting a checkup. I imagine, to follow that analogy, when you first start, there may be a lot of interventions, but then afterwards, if the patient's healthy, it's maybe just an annual checkup.
I have one client that is like that, although I don't think we only meet once a year, and I think it's more that they just prefer to facilitate the quarterly meetings on their own, which I'm fine with. I don't think it's best, and neither do they, but it seems to be working for them. I had one client that I did some advisory work with before I became a business coach, and they found out I was doing business coaching. They asked me to do that with them. I said, well, why? Because this is an extremely well-run company, consistent growth, consistent profitability, very few people issues. And the CEO answered very immediately, and it was, I want to see how great we can be. So we want to be pushed.
That's awesome.
And that's exactly what happened. They went from a company of about 18 million to over 30 million in about a year and a half. And they're marching this year towards 50.
Yeah, I think that's an important, maybe to kind of tie this up. We're kind of near the end here. But that's an important thing, I think, to illustrate at the bottom, or to not illustrate, but to emphasize at the end of this, is that it's obvious when a failing company needs help. It's not as obvious when a company that seems to be humming along needs help. And I think, as I've observed businesses over the years, I think that's probably, the real challenge is getting people who don't recognize that they need improvement to want to better themselves.
Yeah, well, if you're accustomed to working in a messy kitchen, having a clean one might not make a difference to you. Myself, I don't like to work with companies that are, on a break-even path because they're barely surviving. And coaching isn't turnaround work. It shouldn't be. And, I want to work with teams that are really committed to change, which means both individually and as a team, and to be able to have the grit and determination to implement the change and stick with it.
That's great.
Well, this has been really exciting and interesting, Paul. Is there anything that that we haven't talked about yet that you think it's important in terms of what you do and your business and the mission?
My mission is just to help people get more out of their livelihood. I mean, I've been just so blessed in my life that for the vast majority of my business career, I've enjoyed what I've done. And when I hear people say they are miserable in their work life, I just want to plead with them to find something else to do. This is not a way you should live your life. And that has a toxic effect, around all the people that they work with. So basically get out of the company. But the work I do is about, helping people have a better life. And part of that is by having a more enjoyable work life or livelihood, whatever you want to call it, but also to achieve greater goals, which leads to greater prosperity, which ultimately that's what everybody wants. Even though we might define it differently, might have different goals in that regard, but being part of a prosperous company feels good, and being part of a team that's all working together and believing in the same things and doing the work of work for the same reasons is, I think, very, very fulfilling to people. And if I can help them get there, I'm a lucky person to be able to do that task.
How do people find out more about BoxCar Advisory?
You can go to my website, which is boxcaradvisory.com or boxcarbusinesscoaching.com, and you enlighten yourself a little bit more about me and my program there, or it's a list of testimonials, and feel free to reach out on your own. You don't need my introduction. Call them and ask them anything you want.
Wow, this has been really cool. We really thank you for coming to our Big Bay studio, replete with some ambient noise and other things. And hopefully you can join us on another occasion and we can continue to talk about relevant issues. The green room is all prepared for your lunch. I think it was a lobster bisque that you ordered. We thank you so much for being part of our show today.
Thank you for having me here in Big Bay.
That was great, huh, Vince?
Yeah, that's a very enlightening interview with someone who's really making a difference in people's lives.
Yeah. And, as they say, we spend 8 hours or more a day doing work. And then when you break down the fact that it's our waking hours, it's really half of our day is devoted to work.
Yeah. And I can't imagine that if you're not feeling good at work and not doing your best at work, that you're going to come home with a great attitude either. So it impacts everything that we do.
Right. Yeah. When we talked about empowering, the management team, that is very measurable in goals and objectives for the business. But when you also learn how to evolve as a manager, you're probably evolving as a person as well. And instead of being that person that has a lot of frustration inside of him because of half his day being spent, unhappy, you learn that you can be happy at work. Well, you take that home with you, I'm sure.
Yeah. And what I found interesting about what Paul does is strictly working with the leadership team, bringing accountability to that getting better. I mean, he doesn't just come in and give a presentation and say, here you go, here's how you get better, which right. I've experienced so many times. And then people just go, oh yeah, there's another one of those, right?
We just had a great meeting.
Yeah, we just had a great meeting. And what Paul is doing is he's holding the organization accountable for being their best.
Right. And bringing in measurement tools. Because like I said at the start of this, too often businesses measure themselves with the amount of money that they're making.
Right.
But that isn't always the goal of a business,
especially today. People when we were younger, we tended to stay in jobs for a long time. And, now people are looking and saying, I want to go there because of the value that they have for me as a person, as an employee. Yeah. And the environment.
Well, and I think if there's anything that's, a great positive change in, this new working environment we have post-COVID, it's this idea that, people can be, remotely working and still accountable and still productive. And I thought that was interesting too, is how Paul has adapted his coaching business to embrace, the concept of working remotely.
And, this is a guy who had to go out and learn all kinds of new technology to bring that to his clients, and is so passionate about what he does that he did that, and you talk about getting out of your comfort zone. That's
in a way
not
that's
easy.
Still real, because I think there used to be a commercial years ago where they talked about how all the business is being done on the phone and you got to get out there and meet people. And that was really, an old school metric, is that you have to get on the road and do things. And while I think that's still true today, the other reality is that it doesn't have to be.
Right. Right. And, if you look at Paul's client list on BoxCar Advisory, not for us to say, but he's worked with a very diverse group of clients. And
I think, if I remember correctly, he's got businesses that have a total of 7 employees and probably businesses that, if you go across the whole business portfolio, have thousands of employees.
Yeah. And so my takeaway from today's show, from a, sort of a growth lens, the lens of doing better for yourself to make the world better, ultimately, that ripple effect. And Paul certainly made a lot of ripples in the sea of helping make things better, is that it's all interconnected. Work, personal, everything, it's all interconnected, and it's so hard.
Yeah. And I think that's right, because, I was thinking about it while he was explaining his services, that there's probably a lot of business coaches out there that don't even know this service exists. Because most business coaches they kind of have a gunslinger mentality, right? They're risk takers, and, they started a business for any one of various reasons. But they have kind of a strong sense of self and confidence, so that it's almost like when it comes to, admitting personally that you need therapy, these business owners don't like the idea really of, even thinking that they need business coaching. But as Paul explained it, it's not to expose any kind of deficiency, but really rather as a sense or as a tool to help your personal growth and your business growth.
Yeah, exactly. And if you think about it from a therapy standpoint, we can ask the question, how does this help, right? I mean, the therapist is generally working one-on-one or with maybe a married couple or a family, but generally speaking, it's a small group, where an organization is a very large group. So not only does it help the business end, the bottom line, but it helps a lot of people.
Right. And every time you take a look at yourself, either through, a business coach or a therapist or through a good self-help book, you're improving yourself. You're improving the way you look at yourself and the way you look out at the world. So, I just think it's, that's what makes it interesting from my standpoint. It's like, okay, business coaching, how is that really helpful? Well, it's helpful in a lot of ways.
Helpful in a lot of ways. Could be a small ripple that creates bigger ripples in the joy of human beings.
Exactly.
That's what it's all about, right?
Well, that was fun, Vince.
Yeah. Hey, Joe, have a great time until we sit down in the studios, wherever we are again.
Looking forward to it.
Thanks for listening, everybody. And remember, if you are interested in looking up anything more about BoxCar Advisory, it's simply boxcaradvisory.com.
Well, so ends another episode of Friends in Wonder. We want to thank you for listening.
If you'd like to listen to more episodes, provide feedback, questions, or even suggest topics you'd like us to wonder about in future episodes, be sure to check us out at friendsinwonder.com.
We'd also be grateful if you subscribe, like, or share this podcast.
Until next time,
I'm Joe.
and I'm Vince, and we're Friends in Wonder.